So coming into the 2025 MLB season in spring training, we saw a lot of players using Torpedo bats. These were new bats that no one really has ever seen before, and a lot of players were adopting it, and we saw their impact pretty early on in this season. So let's talk about the rise and fall of these Torpedo bats in 2025. Now, the first adopters of this new bat was actually the Yankees. The Yankees had a lot of players in their team using this. Obviously, Anthony Volpe, Giancarlo Stanton, Judge, and Jazz Chisholm were using this a lot. These are some of the first players to use this technology in spring training in the early 2025 season. And we obviously saw this in the first series against the Brewers. They put up like almost 30 runs in 3 games, like something crazy like that. They had some of the most home runs in a single series in quite some time. And everyone reported that it increased exit velo, bat speed, improved your barrel, and all that good stuff. And the Yes Network was the one that brought this one up, especially showing them pretty good photos of kind of what they looked like. And the media kind of ran with this, I'm not gonna lie. The media spotlight grew pretty quickly, and then a lot of fans, were calling it the Yankees secret weapon that they have because no one really has seen this bat before. So a lot of people thought that the Yankees offense against the Brewers in that first series was because of the bat. That's what everyone was kind of saying, that this new bat design is going to help them win so many new games. They're going to be the best team. They're going to be so dominant throughout that season. But that's kind of not really what happened. But there was a big narrative that the Yankees have unlocked some crazy new technology that they were just going to dominate this 2025 season with, which spoiler alert, that's not what happened. But after that first series, a lot of teams were trying to order these bats. I mean, we've heard reports from the media especially that everyone wanted these bats. We saw Torpedo bats popping up in almost every single team's clubhouse. I think some of the early adopters were Elly De La Cruz on the Reds. We saw Lindor on the Mets and Adley Rutschman on the Orioles. And the media once again said half the league could be using them within weeks. So everyone thought this was pretty crazy, that we were going to see this new bat. It was going to be in the game for quite some time. Everyone was going to have this bat, but that's, ultimately not what happened. Also, MLB didn't ban these bats. If you actually looked at the rule book, there was no rule about this bat being introduced, where you kind of have a small end of the bat, a big barrel, and then a smaller part of the handle, I guess you would call it. There was no rules about that in the handbook, and they didn't ban the bat at all. They actually encouraged it. They were writing articles about it on their website. So a lot of teams were trying to order these bats, but a lot of bat companies couldn't handle the demand, and there were a lot of shortages trying to get these bats. So that was another big issue from the bat companies, because I don't think they saw this coming at all. But we had a lot of players adopting these new bats. We had some rookies, some veterans trying to adopt these bats and trying to keep up with the game and trying to not fall behind. And some people were getting to the point and hyping it up like crazy. They were calling it the next best thing since maple bats, which is pretty crazy to think about because that's what a lot of the players use now when it comes to wood bats. So it was getting pretty crazy. And then these bats started, actually get used. We saw players using these all the time. We saw a lot of the best MLB players using them. A lot of the guys we just mentioned, Dansby Swanson was also another candidate that also used this bat. So we saw elite talent showing off these new bats. A lot of people were thinking they were must-have gear. It got to a point where certain players were ordering these bats just to have as a backup bat. A lot of players, didn't really use it, or they wanted to keep with a traditional bat, but they had ordered a bat just in case, they ran out of bats or needed to order more, or, they broke a lot of bats in a game. They had it just in case. So pretty crazy the hype that was around this. And there are obviously crazy amount of highlights with these bats showing off insanely good home runs, clutch hits, all that stuff kind of feeding that hype wheel as well. And there was obviously a lot of crazy marketing at the time about these bats especially. So they were definitely getting pushed a lot. And then we also saw a lot of youth and amateur players trying to get their hands on these bats as well to try to up their careers, which is kind of crazy. So all this is happening between, kind of February, March, April, May, and a little bit into June. But then we get to the end of that June, July, and August, and we don't hear anything about these bats anymore. As the season slowly progresses, the hype silences quickly. Like, there's no really talk about these bats anymore. The media pretty much stopped covering it in baseball. There was a lot of other things going on, obviously, with the All-Star break, with teams down the stretch, how teams were doing, obviously. Those were pretty more important headlines. But the buzz definitely stopped by the midsummer, which is definitely something to think about. And actually, the thing that's very interesting is a lot of players actually switch back to traditional bats. And that was something that wasn't really talked about too much, is the results just didn't match the hype for most players. They had strikeouts, there were timing issues, they felt less comfortable hitting, and all these little tweaks can definitely mess a hitter up. I mean, we've seen it in the past, or with mid-game adjustments, even in the current postseason right now. You change anything, it can mess a hitter up, or you change a little bit and it can make a hitter absolutely great. But like we said, MLB did not ban them, but a lot of people were starting to question these bats, considering a lot of people have switched back to the traditional bats, and the competitive advantage kind of went away. And then the storyline quickly shifted to, once everyone was trying to get their hands on these bats, everyone was trying to use them, to did they really make a difference? And I think the reality of these bats, it only made a difference if the data says it was going to. I think that was the key thing with the Yankees, that everyone kind of forgot about these bats, is the fact that if you were hitting the ball not really on the barrel, then you should have used one of these bats. But if you get a lot of base hits and you do a lot of damage on the end of that barrel, then you probably should be using a normal bat. I think that was the key part a lot of these players were missing, because the Yankees went deep about these bats, and certain players players were using it on the team and certain players weren't, and those players were the ones that were not hitting it off the end of the barrel. So it made sense for that serpent type of player. Not a lot of those players are in the league. There's a lot of guys that hit off the end of the bat because of the crazy sliders and sweepers we have nowadays. So that was kind of the reality. And then actually, once you dive into the actual data, it really showed small gains in bat speed. There was really no consistent league-wide improvement in batting averages or home run rates compared to traditional bats when using these. Obviously, home runs were extremely up this year. Batting average was kind of average, a little bit on the closer side of down, I'm pretty sure, at least with a lot of the teams. And also, a lot of players just know that their hitting potential is all on their mechanics and how they approach the plate, right? So it wasn't some crazy new technology that you could just grab and just be instantly good like with. It's just not how it works in baseball. I will say there was a niche amount of players that did love them. I will say that because the data says so. So once that data is right, then you can kind of switch these bats and probably do a little bit better. But it's just not going to work for everyone. That's just not how every player is. And I think a lot of people oversold the impact of these bats that would actually have, especially from the manufacturers as well. Obviously, they wanted to make more money, so it makes sense for them to kind of hype it up. But by the season's end of the 2025 season, I think the Torpedo bats was an interesting experiment for a lot of the players, but I really don't think it changed too much about, how the game was played. I think it 100% helped some players though, but the reality is it's just not for everyone. And the reality is you have to be skilled enough with your discipline and your approach to the play on a certain pitcher on how you're going to be successful in baseball. And that's just the reality of these Torpedo bats. And I feel like that's kind of why they fell off, just because it works for such a niche amount of players that it's just not going to work for everyone. But for the players it does help. It could be a massive impact for them. So that's kind of my thoughts on the rise and fall of these Torpedo bats. Like I said, it's not going to work league wide. A lot of players switch back, like we said. For a niche audience of MLB players and minor league players, this could 100% work. And this all depends on if you choke up on your bat, if you're closer to the plate, if you're further back from the plate, if you're closer to the mound. These are all factors that can add to these decisions on whether if you use a Torpedo bat. And also what you swing at as a player can definitely matter a lot and depends on what pitches, if you like inside or outside pitches. All these have effect on what bat and what barrel you're going to get. So there's so many different factors that go into this, and that's why the data was so important on figuring out these Torpedo bats. What was your guys' thoughts about the Torpedo bats in the 2025 season? I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. But if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, everyone.